Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the third annual West Virginia Game Developers Expo. My name's Josh, and I've been working alongside all these wonderful people around you, coordinating this event for the last few months. This morning, we have a keynote. Her name is Shayna Moon. Shayna is an associate producer at Santa Monica Studio and recently released the highly anticipated God of War. She has worked closely with top talent in game narrative and audio. She has also worked to support up-and-coming game developers through volunteer and mentoring opportunities such as amplifying new voices and the GDC Conference Associates program. Shayna graduated from Ferris State University in 2014 with a degree in digital animation and game design. She later attended the University of Texas at Austin, Denny Assam's Gaming Academy, completing the program with honors. She began her career in games as a quality assurance tester in her home state of Michigan. Please join me in giving Shayna Moon a round of applause as she gives the keynote this morning.
Good morning. I'm really excited to be here. When I got a message from Josh about a month and a half ago, I was honestly really excited because I had heard about this event and I knew that it was going to bring in a lot of people who were excited to learn about games and people who are already making games. So just so I can get kind of a feel for the crowd, how many people want to make video games at some point in their life? Oh my gosh, it's so many of you. That's wonderful. Oh man. And how many of you consider yourself game developers now? And how many of you have ever made a game or worked on any game at all? Should be the same hands. Okay, if you put your hand up for that third one, you also belong in the second group because the definition of a game developer is a person who has developed a game. So that's the first point of my keynote. And now I'm gonna actually do the prepared notes that I brought today. Hi, I'm Shayna. I'm an associate producer at Santa Monica Studio. Like Josh said, we released God of War earlier this year, which some of you may have played. Yeah, I'm seeing some nods. Okay, great. So we're gonna basically have three parts to this keynote today. First off, I'm going to talk about myself, which is my favorite topic. And then second, I'm going to give you kind of my best practices and my advice about getting into the games industry. And then we're gonna do Q&A, and that'll be real fun because I like answering questions about game development. So who am I? Well, I'm from Michigan. I'm from Southeast Michigan, kind of the Detroit area. When I was in high school, I actually was not really even aware that game development was a job that people did. I've played games all of my life. I've played games since I was 4 years old, sitting on my dad's lap playing NHL 94. But it really didn't come together for me that games were a thing that I could do until I got to college. I actually started out in college, if you can believe it, studying economics and dance as a double major, which if you ask my mom, wasn't really sure what I was going to do with that, but I liked both of those things, so I just wanted to study them. And then I got to a point where dance was not viable for me because I had gotten a lot of injuries, and I got into sort of more intermediate economics courses and realized that it wasn't for me. So I was kind of left adrift. I think that nowadays, when you're in your late teens and sort of your early 20s, I think that we get this sense that we have to have our lives all totally figured out and like we have to like know what we're gonna do for the rest of our lives, which is completely crazy because people can make changes in their careers well into their lives. You know, there is no reason why you can't make a change. And so I was really adrift, and I knew that I liked games, but I didn't really know how they were made or if that was even possible. But I went to a counselor at the college I was at and said, you know, I think I might want to do video games. And she mentioned that her son had been looking into game design degrees and game design colleges. And I said, oh, you could do that? Great. And so the next semester I started at Ferris State, where I studied digital animation and game design, which it was a really, I think, a good experience getting those first 2 years of college in where I was doing a different major because I did a lot of gen eds. I think that in order to be a successful game developer, it's really important not only that you're playing a lot of games, but that you're really a well-rounded individual and you sort of fill out your education with other stuff. Because in game development, you use all of those other skills. Writing in particular is really important because when you're working at a bigger company, for example, like Sony where I work, communication is really important and you have to be able to write eloquently in order to convey your ideas and what you're thinking. So for me personally, going into a game design and game development specific major and specific program was a really good thing. And I made a lot of friends who were also similarly passionate about making games. So then after that, I was extremely fortunate that there was a local game studio about 50 minutes away from where I was going to college. It was called S2 Games, and I was a QA tester there. And it was really exciting because I got hired into a games company right out of college. In fact, when they offered me the job initially, I had to tell them that I needed to wait a month because I needed to finish my degree. So that was extremely fortunate, and I was very excited, and I really loved doing QA testing. I think that going into testing as a career traditionally has been and still is a really great way to start off in the industry because you get a very broad look at how a company operates and you really understand the game that you're working on. And unfortunately, as sometimes in the cases in the industry, I was laid off from that job after about 6 months. And that was terrible. It was just about the worst feeling that you can imagine. A lot of people who I had become close with also lost their jobs at the same time. And because of where I was in the country, in Michigan, where there are not a lot of game companies, there really weren't a lot of opportunities for me to go into games. And of course, I was applying to studios that were outside of Michigan, but I didn't have that experience. I didn't have what those companies were looking for because I was very early in my career. So I did a part-time data entry job for about 3 weeks and then decided that that was not for me. And so I moved back to my hometown and worked IT for a year in a school district. And I think that when you're talking about going into games as your career, IT is a really great thing that you can do, not just as a fallback plan, but as a way to develop skills that are going to be really valuable in game development. One of the best things that I learned while I was doing IT was a lot of issue management and sort of problem solving. And that was really good because when later I was interviewing for production positions, I was able to sort of gear my answers to questions about my skills, talking about that IT experience in terms of what a producer does at a game studio. Does everybody know what a games producer is and does? If you don't know, can you please nod your head or make some kind of movement?
Shayna, could you grab the mic?
Can I grab the mic?
That one, yeah.
This mic?
Yes.
Okay.
I think we'll be better than that.
Okay, hi. Oh, I was actually hoping that I would get to hold the mic today, but then Josh came up with the fancy lavalier and I was like, oh, okay. But now I get to hold it, so this is great. I was talking about being a producer. So let me get back to my experience when I was studying games, because that was when I really started to form a lot of my connections in the industry. This event in particular, you know, this is more of a small scale event. There's a lot of sort of bigger events out there, like in particular the Game Developers Conference. And I was fortunate that people at my school and in my program had gone to GDC in the past and were very encouraging to get people to come out to that event, which is a big conference in San Francisco. And these opportunities to sort of form communities and meet people were really important to my career and how I sort of got through things and made connections. I think that too often when we first start to network, we look at other people and we kind of think of it as collecting like Pokemon. Like I know that my first couple of years at GDC, we would sort of compare the business cards that we had gotten and kind of been like, oh, you got this person from Sony. Oh, I got this person from Riot, blah, blah, blah. But that's really not what networking is about. And it kind of is a bummer, but the truth is that networking gets a lot easier the more you do it. But in order to actually do it, you have to feel comfortable doing it. So you basically end up having to force yourself into networking at first, which is totally fine. My first year at GDC, I remember standing at the door to my hotel room, just absolutely petrified because I knew what I was about to go out and do. I was about to go out and potentially meet thousands and thousands of strangers and try to convince them that I was really good at making video games. And the person that I was traveling to GDC with basically had to yell at me to make me leave the hotel room. So it is difficult to do networking, but you just kind of have to do it over and over again until it gets a little bit easier. So I was working IT at the public school that I was working at. I was the single IT person at I believe, 2,000 person high school. So I got really good at managing people's problems and being self-organized and just kind of managing a large group of people and taking care of what needed to be taken care of. While I was there, I found out about a program called the Denny Assam's Gaming Academy at University of Texas, Austin. It was specifically a program tailored to people who were interested in being creative directors or producers. And it had sort of a rigorous application process. This was kind of a post-undergraduate certificate program, so not quite a master's, but also a little bit of a step up from like a bachelor's degree. And so it was kind of an intense application process. The program was run by Warren Spector, who was the original creative director for Deus Ex, which is a fairly influential and sort of landmark video game franchise. So the opportunity to come and work with him was really special, and it was an experience that I got to do that really gave me the experience of working with someone who had kind of seen it all in the industry. There aren't a lot of programs out there like Denny Assam's, but the thing that I kind of wanted to talk about in relation to that was that in order to go and do that program, I had to move to Texas from Michigan. And while I was at Ferris studying game development, I kind of knew in the back of my mind that if I wanted to do what I wanted to do, which was go into sort of big AAA game experiences, I was going to have to leave Michigan, which was honestly, when I think back on it, it was a really tough thing to do. I moved really far away from my entire family and everybody I knew, and I moved to Texas, which I had never been to before, and got into this program with basically 20 strangers, and we all tried to like build a group together and make a game together. So it was scary, and there were sometimes when I was out there when I thought, wow, I'm really missing out on a lot of stuff at home. Like my younger brother had just gone off to college and was having all these like college experiences, and I wasn't there, and it was hard. But I think that when you want to do something kind of extraordinary, when you want to create things that impact a lot of people, you have to take a risk like that sometimes. And maybe it's not something as big as moving really, really far away from home. Maybe it's just something like having the courage to stand up and raise your hand and say, hey, I'm here and I made this project, come and look at it. That can be a little bit scary too, but when you have that boldness, I think that makes people pay attention. When you have the confidence to go and take a risk and be confident in what you're creating, that is gonna do you so much better than if you don't take a chance at all. So Texas, and specifically Austin, had a much bigger game development scene than Michigan. Austin is pretty well known nowadays for the VR community, so virtual reality stuff, augmented reality. The game Job Simulator was developed there. That's one of the more higher profile VR games. And that was really exciting. I went to quite a few events with the VR community. I met a lot of really creative people. A good friend of mine is now the community manager at Alchemy Labs, which is one of the bigger VR companies. So that was a great time, and it was an exciting time. There was a lot of really creative stuff happening. But I wanted to be a producer. And VR companies tend to be sort of structured like startup companies, basically. They're more technical startup companies. And so there wasn't really a need there for an entry-level person in production. And so once again, once the Denny Assam's program was over and we had completed our game and we had sort of shown our game around at GDC at an event for Intel, I was back on the job hunt again. And for a few months, basically my full-time job was applying to jobs in the games industry. And it was difficult because getting into the games industry is pretty tough. Not impossible, certainly not, but you really do have to put the work in. It's kind of like you have to put in what you want to get out of it. And so basically every day I was sending out applications. Every day I was trying to read up on how to do a great interview, how to write the best cover letter. I think I was convinced that, if I had put together the perfectly formulated resume, then someone would have to hire me. And I was interviewing with a couple places, and I had done a couple of on-site interviews. And I saw a position at Santa Monica Studio, and I remembered that I had met a manager, executive producer from Santa Monica Studio at an event at GDC that year. And so when I applied, I sent her a little message and said, "Hey, remember me? I made a good impression on you, right?" And I interviewed there. I had my on-site interview there. And a couple weeks later, I was rejected from that position, which was really tough. There was another studio that I was also interviewing with at the time that also rejected me, and that was also really tough. But this was really hard. I had been applying to a lot of places. I had moved back to Michigan because it wasn't sustainable for me to stay in Texas. So there were a lot of days where I would come to my mom in her office and just sit down next to her and say, "I'm really sad, Mom. I don't know what else to tell you. This is wearing me down." And then 6 weeks later, I got a phone call, and Sony invited me to come work for them. Which was really remarkable. I was kind of shocked and, of course, really excited because I had finally, done it. I had gotten hired by a AAA studio, and I think that for a lot of people who go into games, like a lot of people really want to make their game and do independent games. Are there folks here who are interested in going into indie games, publishing their own games? Yeah, that's great. It's honestly there's nothing wrong with going into indie games. It just wasn't what I wanted to do because I was interested in production specifically. And for me, the challenge of working at a bigger studio and sort of working as part of the big machine of sort of the AAA machine, for me as a producer, I wanted that challenge. And I wanted that opportunity to work with a lot of people and work on a game that would have a really wide reach kind of automatically. So I get to work with a lot of really, really great people at Sony. It's a great studio to work at. Some of the most experienced people in the industry work there. And specifically, I was the audio producer for God of War. So part of that job was working with the PD Sound Group, which is the kind of a external team that works on sound for all of the Sony games. And these folks are extremely experienced. There are people on that team who have been doing sound for games for 20 years. So I came in sort of fresh off the boat producer saying, all right, I'm going to produce you people who've been doing this job forever. And that was scary too. But again, I had to sort of take a risk and buck up my confidence, and we ended up shipping God of War, I think, with some pretty good audio. Yeah. And it's really difficult to describe kind of what the experience of shipping a giant project like that is like. I think that a lot of the times when people are going through the process of applying to jobs, specifically in the games industry, you see a lot in job descriptions talking about experience. And you're thinking to yourself like, well, I need to get experience, but in order to get experience, I have to already have experience because they want experience for me to get hired. And the truth is that there are a lot of different places that experience can come from. I talked about my IT job, and when I was first interviewing for production jobs, I talked about that IT job a lot because it had things that I even now carry over into my production job sort of day to day. The management of issues, being that person who's ready to go and solve a problem for people when they need it, that is sort of the core of what being a producer is. And to some extent, it's the core of, a person on a team. Teamwork is, not exaggerating, probably the most valuable skill that you can have if you want to go into game development. There are a very small number of people who have been able to develop games on their own and publish them and have really good success. But even those people, those examples, they have people behind them who are supporting them. You really cannot be an island in this industry. You really have to be the type of person that people want to work with. I was really fortunate because in my game development program, I had a lot of opportunity to do teamwork and team projects. And not only that, but I sought out the opportunity to work in teams outside of my program. You can go, and you can definitely go through a game design development program or even like a software development program and get by just doing the homework and get your degree and just pass through. But I can tell you here today that having that kind of attitude is not the ticket to success. In addition to all of my regular coursework, I also was a part of our game development program, which started out as kind of a club where we would all get together and talk about video games and eat pizza. Sorry, I have to fight this water bottle for a second. It started out as a club where we would sort of eat pizza and talk about video games, but then as we sort of went on, we decided that we wanted to be making games. So myself and my good friend Jacob, we took that club and sort of tried to turn it into a mini game developer studio. And initially, we definitely bit off more than we can chew because we planned on making a very ambitious 2D platformer in a month that ultimately I think took us 8 months to make. So we didn't know what we were doing, but that's actually fine because the projects that you work on in school don't have to be amazing, and the first things that you make are probably not going to be that great. They could be your idea baby, and you just don't have the experience to make what's in your head, and that's fine. It is so much more important when you're younger, when you're earlier in your careers, to be making stuff and getting the experience of working on a project and finishing it. Finishing things is so important. I know a lot of people, myself included, you just kind of have a list in your head, or you have a list written down, or you have the beginning pieces to a project that's just the beginning of it. It's just that initial spark and idea. And there is a value to those. There is a value to having creative ideas and pulling them together and having the ambition to make something. But until you actually make something and complete it and then show it to people, you haven't you haven't really learned the lesson that's going to take you and carry you into success, particularly in the games industry. One of the things that I did a lot when I was in school to get some like additional experience in doing this kind of thing was I would do game jams. Has anybody ever done a game jam before? Yes? So just for a quick definition, a game jam is an event usually in like a fixed period of time. Sometimes they can be as long as a month, sometimes they can be as short as 24 hours, which I did a lot of 24-hour game jams when I was in college, and I am now too tired to do those anymore. But y'all can do them. They're great fun when you don't need to sleep. And those game jams are really, really great because they sort of the pace of them encourages you to grab onto an idea and then just go. And that's great because if you can just hang your hat on one good idea and then just commit to making it, that gets you into the habit of finishing things. And speaking as a producer, finishing projects is like the hardest part. So if you can get good at that, you can pretty much do anything. So I've been at Sony for about 2 years now, actually exactly 2 years because I started on October 10th, 2016. And yeah, so it's been 2 years and it's been really, really great. I feel really fulfilled every single day at Sony. I work with really great people and I work on really cool stuff. It's really an honor and I consider it a privilege to be able to work with the people that I work with. But I will say that when I initially went to Sony, I kind of expected as a producer to be put into a box, that things were going to be very corporate and I was going to be very like, okay, you do this thing and this person does this thing and never shall the two meet. But that has not been my experience. And what I really love about games is the different types of people that it pulls together and the different types of skills that are required for it. So at Sony, I was not put in a box. I have a background in animation. I have a background being really interested in game narrative. I really like archiving and like text and lore of things. And I definitely had some opportunities to put those skills to use when as I've been working at Sony. So that's another thing that I really, really love working on games. And if you're the type of person where you're kind of like, well, I really like this, but I also really like this, and I want to do this, and like I really like reading stories, but I also like math, and I like this. And like, if you're that type of person who has a lot of sort of diverse interests and is kind of looking for a way to pull all those things together, like game development is that thing. It can really do that for you. So now I've shipped God of War. I'm still at Sony. It's a great team that I'm really proud to be a part of. I think that most people would look at my career and say, like, that's a success. That's something that I wish I could do. So how do I do that? Well, it's not, I wish that I could tell you like 5 exact steps in like how to get into the games industry and have like a really cool career that you want. But the truth is that every time I talk to somebody about how they got into the games industry, every story is different. My story of going to a games program and then getting a job right out of college and then getting laid off and then doing IT and then doing another round of education and then getting kind of the job that I had always wanted, like that's one variation of like a lot of different stories. But there are some things that you can do to sort of help your success, and I'm going to talk about them now. So one thing that you can definitely do to help yourself out is to start getting active on social media. Does anybody use Twitter? Twitter? Cool. My Twitter handle is QORQUIQ. If you talk to me on Twitter, I'll talk back to you because it's really easy and quick and I like to do it. I like to talk to people about games. Getting your social media is a great way of just like sort of casually reaching out to other game developers. And the thing about game developers is not only do game developers like playing games, Game developers love to talk about games and talk about making games. And that's like one of my favorite things to do is get on Twitter and just see like who's talking about cool game narrative today. I'd like to talk to them. And then you just can. You want to kind of avoid the sort of like, oh, this is my favorite game, so I'm just going to tweet a million tweets at the people who make it. That's not the way to do it. I understand totally that there's like excitement that comes along with talking to somebody from a big company, but what you're really looking for is people that have cool ideas that you can kind of have a dialogue with. And that sort of social media presence can really be a way of like reaching out and finding new and exciting things. Having your LinkedIn like put together, you all are a little bit young for it, but once you kind of get into college and start sort of really actively looking to like be kicking off careers in like IT and software and games, like having that LinkedIn lockdown is great. There's a ton of other social media platforms, but my best advice for sort of any of them, if you're trying to use a piece of social media to advance your career, is just be intentional about it. After God of War came out, I sort of started to see more of the potential of social media and how it could help me reach out to other developers and encourage people to come into the industry. And so I started paying a little bit more attention to my social media and started being more intentional about when I was posting and what I was posting. I started asking more questions instead of just sort of blaring my ideas out into the void. What else? What else can make you successful in getting into games? Having interests outside of games. That it sounds maybe like contradictory, but it's really, really important because I think that a lot of the times in games we can tend to get into kind of a loop of like, we're only discussing this certain crop of games and that's the only thing that's inspiring us. But games take inspiration from a bajillion different places. Comic books are really great. Like, if you've played the Spider-Man game that came out this year, it's amazing. It's like a really fantastic game. And it's taking inspiration from other mediums like comic books and movies and 2D animation. I really like anime and manga, and I've seen a lot of that influence on games lately. Art, history, drama, like so many things. And I'll say that I think the most successful games that have come out this year have come from a very like personal narrative. So if you want to make a game, I would recommend making a game about something that you really love, something that's really personal to you, like a personal story. And there's other stuff that we can talk about, like specific events that you might want to pay attention to. GDC, the Conference Associate Program, which is the volunteer program, is a really fantastic way of initially doing your networking and then like building up a community. And the other thing that I would recommend is just getting involved in your local game development community, because if I think back to every step along the way in my education and in my career, like every single step where I've had something really good happen to me has been because I had a community of people that I was friends with or who I had worked on projects with, and they helped me out. Like my friend Josh drove me to my first ever job interview, to that QA position that I got. And there's so many more examples like that. And the key is to just be kind to the people around you, because really, I think that sometimes we can get into the trap of feeling very competitive with the people around us, and that's like the worst thing you can do. Because at the end of the day, you're not competing with the people around you, you're competing with the entire world of game development. So if you get kind of tunnel vision and just focus on being the best in sort of your small pond, you're really going to end up shortchanging yourself. So my thoughts on that would be, encourage the people around you. Instead of trying to push them down to make yourself look good, try to be the type of person who pulls up everybody around you. If you find something that is really cool and really interesting, share it with the people around you. Don't hoard it. Like, work on your personal projects, meet the people around you. Like, if you look to your left and look to your right, Pretty much everybody in this room said that they want to make games. So hey, guess what? Just start bunching up and you can do it. The tools to make games have never been more accessible. You know, there are still hurdles to get by. I'm not going to stand here and pretend that it's like super easy, but like if you have a group of really good friends and you all kind of want to make a game, but you're like, how do we make a game? Just Google it. It's really easy. Unity's free. And I think you all are learning that they do Unity here at Mount West, so just like do that. It's real fun to do. I've played around with that. And there's like a million game engines out there that are free to use. There's Twine. Even if you don't have like a super strong technical background, you can still be making games. You can be making board games. That doesn't require any programming at all. So don't let any part of don't let anything sort of stop you from trying to do game development, because I guarantee you that the limits that you're putting on yourself are things that maybe even are not real. Like you can think that because I am a certain person or I'm a certain age or I'm a certain gender or whatever, like I can't do this. Like you absolutely can. And the more people that we have sharing their perspectives and their voices in the industry, the better games we're going to get. So just to recap, none of what I've been able to do would have been possible without the support of others around me. If you look at every step along the way, I can point to people who helped me. And you can ask for what you want and what you need and push for what you need without being a jerk about it, if you can use your ambition to pull up the other people around you. And you do, at the end of the day, kind of have to be your own advocate, because no one is going to hand you, hey, here's an opportunity to make a really cool game. Like, you have to be actively seeking out those opportunities and then be prepared for them when you encounter them. And lastly, I just want to say, and I mean this very sincerely from the bottom of my heart, you are the next generation of game makers. Like, that's just a fact. A lot of you today have said that you want to make games, and I really think that you should. So if you're kind of on the fence about it and you've been waiting for a sign, consider this your sign, because I want to see all of you make the great games that you want to make. I can't tell you that it won't be hard, but I can tell you sincerely that I believe in you. And if you build bonds with the people around you, you will have a local game development community that you can lean on. I believe in you, and if you can form that community around yourselves, you'll have a whole group of people that'll believe in you too. Thank you. Thank you. So I kind of know what format I want to do the Q&A, unless you had a thing you want to do.
Tell them about it? Yeah.
So we're going to do questions and answers now. I just want to say, if you have a question that you think is going to be like a longer form thing, I am going to have an extended Q&A this afternoon at 3 p.m. where you can kind of ask whatever you want. So we're going to do Q&A. I'm going to call on people, and I'll repeat the question so that way everybody can hear it. Sound good? All right. Questions? Yes, you with the pencil.
What was your Twitter handle again?
What was my Twitter handle? It is QORQUIQ. What does that have to do with my name? It doesn't. It's nonsense, but I like it, so I'm not going to change it. And just in that kind of same vein, my email address, it is Shayna, SHAYNA, GMOON@gmail.com. If you email me and say, hey, I was in Huntington and I heard your speech, I have this question about game development, or hey, please look at my game, I absolutely will, and I will reply to you, because like I just said, I am 100% committed to your success and helping you succeed. So feel free to ask me those questions if you're kind of don't feel like asking anything today, or if you come up with some other question. Anybody else? So the question is, are there particular groups that don't require coding experience that can still be doing game development? Well, one is board games and physical games. That those two worlds, like the board game world and the digital game world, they totally intersect and people kind of can cross over. So if you're interested particularly in like designing games as a discipline, board games is like the easiest non-coding related way to do it. There are also game engines that require kind of a more limited understanding of engineering and coding. I mentioned Twine, which is like a purely text-based thing, but I believe both Unreal and Unity have kind of visual scripting languages, which you can learn. And also I'll say this, coding is not that hard. There are a lot of resources online to learn how to code and to learn how to do like very simple coding, and you can do a lot with very simple concepts. But yeah, and also like if you just go on YouTube and search like how to make a game, there's so much more content on there about sort of the discipline of making games than I could ever outline in one speech. But I encourage you to like go out and do the research yourself, because you can really find a lot of good stuff that way. In the middle. When I was without a job, what did I do to make money? I did get a job. I got a data entry job. I was entering data for a medical study in lots of different languages. It was incredibly boring and I hated it. I did it for like 3 weeks. And then I got my IT job. IT's the best. I love it. I got to solve problems, which is the thing that I need to keep myself engaged. I think that I think it's an associate degree that you can get here that has a games concentration. Is that correct? I think that that's great because you can kind of get that like technical knowledge of like how computers work, and that can take you anywhere. Like everybody needs IT. If you're good at IT and helping people solve their problems, like that is a great way to sort of get you where you need to be accessible to games companies. In the back. So I'm really busy all the time, and so I haven't done a game jam in a while, but I do other stuff to like sort of keep myself creatively engaged. About a month and a half ago, I started writing daily. So I write 750 words every day, which is kind of my own creative outlet that isn't games. When you're doing games full time, you can get sick of video games. But that being said, I did play like a whole bunch of Assassin's Creed last week, so so I haven't done game jams in a while, but I do know some people do. It's just not something I currently do right now. Yes.
Where can you find or get involved in game jams?
So Twitter. On Twitter, there's like a hashtag that's just like hashtag Game Jam, and you can find a bunch that way. There's a website called Itch, like an itch on your skin, itch.io, and they have constant game jams going on. You can also do like local game jams, like you can say, oh, let's get like 30 people together in a room and we'll all make a game and then play each other's games. That's a really good way to do it. There's Ludum Dare, which is kind of like a biannual game jam that happens. And they also have like smaller games, I think every couple weeks, smaller game jams. So there's a lot out there. Again, it's honestly like you just Google game jam and you'll find stuff. And the first game jam that I ever did kind of online, I did it with like an engineer in another country, and we just made this like cool little horror game, and it was really fun. And I just like had this totally random experience of communicating with somebody else and just sort of negotiating and figuring out how to make a game together. So I got a lot out of that experience. So I encourage you to kind of do stuff that takes you outside of your comfort zone. Way in the back, in the blue shirt. So what is the number one thing that a AAA game studio is looking for on a resume? It definitely depends on what kind of role you're going for. I'd say that the thing that you want to kind of look for when you're putting together your resume is you want to make sure that you're making an individual resume that's tailored to the position that you're applying for. So you may not know this, but when you apply to a job at like a larger company, they put your resume through sort of a computer algorithm that checks for keywords. And so like literally look at the verbiage that's being used in the job listing, and you can like just put that into your resume, and that helps. Like when a recruiter is looking at your resume, They're looking to see if you like check the boxes that are on the job listing. So you want to make their job really easy. You want to make it really easy for them to look at your resume, look at the job posting and say, oh, this matches this, this matches this, this matches this. And if you can make their job easier, they'll like you a whole lot more and you'll be more likely to get that interview. In the back. So the question is basically like when a job posting is talking about like the length of time of experience that you should have in the industry, like how much wiggle room is there, and how specific do you have to be? I would say that, well, first of all, don't lie. That's bad. They'll figure it out pretty quick if you lie. But I think that, you know, if you're like an entry-level person and you see a job listing that says like 1 to 2 years of experience and you've done a year of like game design programs at your school, you can apply to that. That's fine. It's totally fine. And remember what I just said, like if you tick the boxes on like the recruiters thing of like, we're looking for a person who works well with medium-sized teams, and you say like, oh, at my school I worked on a team of 20 to put together a game, like that ticks the box, and it doesn't necessarily matter that it's not professional experience. Did that help? Good. Gentleman in the pink shirt in the back. What would I recommend for somebody who sort of either can't or doesn't want to go out and wants to stay local and wants to like make their own games and promote their own games? To be 100% honest, it's not something that I really have a lot of experience with, because the companies that I've worked for have been like medium to large, and I don't have a lot of like indie dev experience. But if you want to get more information about that, I recommend that you check out the free GDC talks that are on their YouTube channel, because they put a lot of those talks on YouTube like a couple years after the conference, and there are a lot of like really good indie talks to check out. So I would encourage you to look there. Again, there's like nothing wrong with wanting to go into indie development. It just isn't the thing that I personally wanted to do. What were all the classes that I took when I was doing game design? So I took like a beginning coding class that was like a C# class. I also did like Flash. I had a Flash class, which is like so out of date now. We would never do things in Flash now, but HTML5 is cool. Learn that. So my program, it was digital animation and game design, so I really did kind of the full spectrum of what's required for making games. So I took like 3D modeling classes, 3D animation classes, character design. Zbrush was a class that I took that was really cool. Another great thing is that they had us take like a contracts class. Having an understanding of like how a business works and how a contract works is really good if you want to go into really any industry, but for games it's really important, especially if you're going to like be managing your own projects or like trying to put out your own projects, like understanding like you do need a contract for everything. Like don't just go into things blind. What other courses did I take? I also had like a project management class. And then we did a capstone project at the end of our degree, which was a semester working on one project, which I think was a really good opportunity. I'll say that I also did a couple of independent studies as part of my bachelor's degree. So I did one in 2D animation because I wanted to make a 2D game for my capstone. And then I did a project management independent study where me and 2 other friends worked on a game together. Yes. Were there any non-technical classes that have helped me in my career? I would say that like the non-technical classes were actually probably more helpful. I took like a public speaking class, and a public speaking class was a really good thing to take, because now in my job now I have to talk in front of like big groups of people who have like way more experience than me, and I have to be very confident. So getting those skills was really good. Anything to do with writing. Like I'm really into writing just as a hobby, but also I think that if you can write well and write in a way that is compelling to people, like that is so important, and that's a skill that will really take you far, whatever you decide to do. I took like a script class. Storytelling in general, like understanding the bones of a story is really, really good for like going into games, because there's a book by Brian McDonald called Invisible Ink that I read recently, which is all about sort of how to construct the armature of a story and sort of flesh it out so that it has a theme that goes through it and sort of ties back into itself and is compelling for people to read. Yeah, so yeah, like having the technical skills was important, and that was how I got like my initial QA job, and having that technical background helps me in my production job now, but I would definitely not underestimate sort of the power of sort of your general ed courses or sort of more liberal arts type classes, because they make you a more well-rounded individual. Anybody else? Yes, in the middle here. How would an independent studio or a smaller studio go about making a larger scoped game or like a larger budget game? I don't know. I think a lot of people, actually it's really interesting because recently there have been a lot more of what people call AA games, which is sort of games that have a higher production value, but they are sold for a lower price point. There have been some really good games in that space. But again, I actually don't know that much about independent development. So this is kind of inspiring me to want to look into it more. So I will do that. Email me, we'll talk about it. In the middle, right here. What other languages have I actually used? It was actually C#. If I said C+, that was wrong. It was C#. I'm not a coder, like I'm not an engineer, so I don't do any like coding in my day-to-day life. I have had to do some like very, very rudimentary like Python style stuff. Oh, and I use like JQL databases a lot because that's what Jira is. Jira is the best. Please learn about Jira. It will make your future producers very happy. Yeah, I'm not the expert on that, but C# is like kind of the universal one that I know. There's also Lua. Lua also seems to be very integral to games right now. Anybody else? I saw a hand here on the left. What was the hardest thing about producing a team that had way more experience than me? When I initially came in to produce that team, I was definitely intimidated by them, by that experience that they had, and I think that kind of made me doubt my own judgment about what we should be doing production-wise. It kind of made me think like I needed to be less hands-on in putting together the schedules for things. And so I would say for like a good month or month and a half, I was not as diligent as I should have been about like scheduling stuff for them. And then very, very quickly after that, I realized that I needed to be doing my job, and I needed to not let that intimidation factor stop me from doing my job. So it was really like if you've heard the phrase like fake it till you make it, I just kind of summoned up that courage within myself and just made myself very confidently put out those schedules while still being open to their feedback, because I didn't want to be a jerk. So yes, I think that, so the question is kind of about like team composition, and I think that that's a pretty complex topic. Let me do it. I've done in extemporaneous speaking. Let's think about it. What are the components of a game studio? Engineering, design. Design also includes like combat and level design. You can have a narrative team that is doing the story of your game that's also going to be heavily involved with design. You have various teams related to art. You can have environmental art, character art, UI art. UI is like one of the most important parts of a game. Don't skimp on the UI, because if you have bad UI, your game will be bad. Of course, you have your sound department and your producers. Please put producers on your team. We desperately need jobs. And anything more complex than that, you can do your own research, but also like just email me and we'll talk about it. Again, my email is Shayna, SHAYNAGMOON@gmail.com. I will reply to you. I love talking about making games. And I think that's it. Thank you all so much. It was really great. Thank you so much.